Good morning, guys. How are you all doing? I know video is very, very late, but I started to do it, and I know actually in 20 minutes the draw for the Champions League last 16 is going to happen, and I'll do a reaction to that as well. But I still needed to take a look back to the Crystal Palace game as a sort of therapy session for me as well. Sometimes you need to look at it with sort of non-wary eyes. I've not been that great for the last couple of days. I was throwing up a couple of nights ago, and I was still getting it over yesterday, and I was in no kind of state to talk about football. I was generally just in bed all day, not very well. But I need to talk about this game a little bit. And to be honest, it's been quite nice, actually. Calming down an awful lot, actually. It's been 48 hours since that game, and I've read countless pieces. I've heard podcasts. I've seen people talk about it online. And I think I've taken in the mood quite well, and sort of I've calmed down a bit naturally. I think you do calm down a tiny bit when the game's sort of moved on. But I think there's a lot to be said for this game and what it could mean in the microcosm of our season, as a microcosm of our season so far. I'm going to start initially with how I felt at full time. Immense frustration. At full time, I understood the groans and the boos, and I don't think they were booing the side because they were angry at the side. I think the fans in the ground were booing because they were frustrated. I think they were immensely frustrated because time and time again, we've sort of shot ourselves in the foot. Josh, by the way, in the chat, me and Ace are going to do a video tomorrow morning, I think, with a little bit of luck. So fingers crossed you'll get that, Josh. But I think the frustration came from seeing that this City side, I actually think it was frustrating because, for me, I actually thought that City played quite well for most of the game. I don't know about you guys, but I watched that first half against Crystal Palace and felt, actually, that was the most Manchester City performance I've seen in an awful long time. I thought it was. I felt we were really good in that first half. We saw that stat about 10 players, all 10 outfield players creating a chance for Man City. We were playing really well. We didn't score a load of goals or anything like that, but I thought the football was really good. It was as close to I've seen City smothering a team and dominating for an awful long time. I'm not saying it was perfect, but it felt like watching Manchester City Football Club again. And I'm stressing this for a reason. It did feel that way, and I want to judge the whole performance. But for whatever reason, and I think for a large part of the second half, we were sort of reasonably in control as well. But for whatever reason, familiarity kicked in, and the inevitable kicked in as well. It was so disappointing to see, essentially, individual mistakes kick in. The things that stood out for me that we've sort of lost are those days of Manchester City keeping the ball in the corner. Generally, we used to keep the ball in the corner and pass it around. Look, we've always conceded chances towards the end of the game. Every single team at a top level will concede chances toward the game because other sides are just too good. Like, we can't pretend that there was never a thing. It's going to happen. But we're rarely under the cosh. And Manchester City have become under the cosh quite a lot, really. Even against Luton, when we won 2-1 away, we're still holding on towards the end. And it felt to me like the thing that's mainly gone, words like, like lazy or the passion or whatever have gone. They get thrown around quite easily when you drop points. I don't think this City side are lazy. I don't think they lack passion. I don't think they lack determination. But do I think they lack the nerve right now? Absolutely. I think a lot of it is look. I try and think of the reasons what cause it. I think that there's a few reasons. I think there's a lack of nerve right now. I think there's a lack of nerve in this team. Why is that? Could it be that the makeup of this team has changed a little bit? There's no Kevin De Bruyne. There's no Ilkay Gundogan. You know, these experienced players. There's no Riyad Mahrez to sort of keep the ball in the corner and just slow it down a tiny bit. It could be that so much has changed from last season with pivotal players that it just feels a bit different. And then maybe, you know, then you've got your new captain, Kyle Walker. I'm not going to sit here, actually, and do what I think the temptation is to do and dig out Kyle Walker entirely, because I know Kyle Walker isn't playing right now, but I don't think fundamentally Kyle Walker is the beginning and the end of Manchester City problems right now. I think that's a bit of a lazy narrative to do. I think the malaise on this team spreads throughout quite easily. The thing is, for me, is that I reckon we're looking around a little bit and we're not really seeing the leaders that we potentially need. Kyle maybe isn't that guy in the way that De Bruyne is or Walker is or whatever, and that's not necessarily his fault as such. But when you look around and you see a team that's a little bit less experienced, you know, Vardiel is not as experienced, Alvarez is not experienced, people like Doku are not experienced or whatever, and then the people who are meant to be stepping up aren't maybe natural leaders, you know, aren't on people like Jack Grealish isn't a natural leader. Phil Foden isn't quite a natural leader yet, you know. And Alvarez, look, I think he's still got language barrier issues as far as I can tell. You know, the Bernardo isn't quite yet a captain material, you'd argue. And you look through that team as well, and you think, well, Rodri is a little bit. You know, do we need Jon Stones alongside him? Do we need Jon Stones alongside Ruben Diaz to bring out the best in terms of the balance? But I think we look around this side right now, and ultimately what it comes down to is, I've looked back, a lot of it just comes down to individual mistakes. Like, it is that. It's individual mistakes. Like, that to me is, these aren't bad players. Individual mistakes and things that go wrong, it's mentality entirely. It's nerve, because when you're confident, here's a metaphor for you, or a good example. Do you remember Jon Stones many years ago? How, like, even though he knew he was a quality player, he would make a mistake, and because he made a mistake, he would make another. And we all know Jon Stones is better than that, and we got frustrated. Jon Stones is a sort of like a mini example of what it looks like when you lose confidence. We know Jon Stones now has gone past that, and he's absolutely excellent, and he doesn't make them anymore. But a team can go through that too, and they can be perfect for 90 minutes and just make a silly mistake and cost you a game. Like, we've all seen that, you know, with players. We've all seen that with teams that aren't fully confident. And for whatever reason right now, this Manchester City side, they don't feel invincible. They don't feel like they can take on the world. They feel, I can sense amongst his team, that they are going to concede. And eventually, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Eventually, the team start to feel, we're probably going to concede. And if you feel like you're going to make a mistake, guess what? You're probably going to make a mistake. You're not on autopilot. This Manchester City side right now, to me, they're just not on autopilot. They're not. And, like, you can sense that there's a bit of anxiety. Like, people are just maybe misjudging crosses, or defenders are getting rinsed. The midfield is maybe making sloppy passes when they should be keeping the ball. Usually, when you can't keep the ball at the end of a game, and you kept it for 75 minutes of it, it could come down to tiredness. But I also think a large part of that is nerve once again. They are getting sloppy. They're getting anxious. Guardiola even called Ruben Diaz anxious lately. And to me, these things make a difference. I mean, like, when you've got someone like Ruben Diaz, who's usually such a monster defensively, struggling to win all these duels, then you start to think, well, are they making mistakes? Yeah, they're making little mistakes, and they haven't got the rhythm, they haven't got the focus, they haven't got the consistency. It's one of those things where you sense that the players aren't fully switched on right now. I don't think it's a lack of professionalism. I don't think it's a lack of ambition or a lack of want or urgency. I think it's a lack of, I don't know, they're just not holding their heads together right now. Most things in life just come down to that mentality side. It could be that just so much has changed. I mean, when you look at the, I'm just going to go on my phone right now because I'm not ignoring you all, but because I'm trying to find the team that I was replying to Amos from the City Report podcast the other day, and he replied with the Champions League final team. The Champions League final team was Ederson, Akanji, Diaz, Ake, Stones, Rodri, Silva, De Bruyne, Gundogan, Grealish, and Haaland. Now, the team the other day against Palace, let me just get the Palace team. The team was, it was changed quite a lot since then. The team against Palace, where are we going? Was in goal, Ederson, so that was the same. Kyle Walker was started this, though. It was, the other day was Diaz, Ake, Vardiol, Rico Lewis, Rodri, Bernardo Silva, Phil Foden, Grealish, and Alvarez. So there was no Haaland, there was no De Bruyne or Gundogan, Akanji wasn't playing, and no Stones. There was quite a few changes. Half the team essentially wasn't there anymore. And a lot of those players that I've just mentioned are senior players. I know people like to kind of talk about Akanji, for example, not being that great, but Akanji is actually a very senior player. Akanji is literally a senior international. You're one of Switzerland's best players. That may not count for much, but what I'm saying, when I talk about one of Switzerland's best players, probably their best player, he deals with the weight of that expectation on his shoulders as this country's star player. That stuff counts for something. And you could tell Akanji really stood up to the test of time towards the end of last season. He was absolutely excellent. Then you talk about Gundogan not being there. You talk about De Bruyne not being there. You talk about Stones not being there. These people, I think, help the likes of Diaz. I think they help the likes of Nathan Ake, you know? I think right now, for whatever reason, this squad is lacking that leadership around them. That to me, is the issue that we've got here. This City side still has the quality. Now, the conclusions that you could make, there are many, you know? Is this team not good enough? Is this team nearly as good, but we're not quite ready. Is this team absolutely fine? Does this team just need Kevin De Bruyne? This team's great, and it's just a typical Manchester City thing that we do. Somewhere probably in the middle of that spectrum is what the answer is. It's very possible. Take the first one. Maybe this team isn't quite as good. Maybe when you really think about it, in the last 18 months, we've lost all these players in Manchester City's squad. And I know some of these weren't quite as involved, but we lost all these players in the last 18 months. Fernandinho only left 18 months ago. Cancelo, Laporte, Jesus, Mahrez, Sterling, Zinchenko, and there's someone else, Gundogan. There's 8 very trusted senior players. That's a hell of a bench there, by the way. 8 players that Guardiola implicitly trusted there. And the issue for me is right now, a lot of the time, is I think, is our squad as good as that? No. The squad size is probably the same, but is the depth as good? It probably isn't. Now, I know we went on to win a treble after most of these players left. I know that. But I feel like we've sort of reached the tipping point of like how many players we can let go before we affect the balance of the squad, you know. And I feel like that's where we're at right now. And the squad just seems a little bit too weak and a little bit too... I feel like he just doesn't trust a lot of this squad. I mean, I look at the bench the other day and Asan said it. He said it on Twitter. If Mahrez and Gundogan are on that bench, they come on regardless at 2-0. Because they do. Guardiola looked at the bench and thought, Jon Stones should have come on earlier, by the way. But Calvin Phillips, he's not bringing on. I would have thought he brought Kovacic on, but I don't think he fully trusts him yet. But then you look through the bench. Ortega, Gomez, Kanji maybe, Nunes, Bob and Susaho. There's not a lot of players that he fully trusts there right now. Not because they're not good enough maybe, mainly because they're just not quite there yet maybe. Maybe Kovacic Nunes needs a bit more time to be fully trusted by Guardiola. Kanji and Stones, I'm surprised he didn't bring them on earlier for what it's worth. I felt like he needed to do that. But I feel like the squad right now is sort of a little bit kind of broken up and not fully... It's not fully where it needs to be. And like, it could be that when De Bruyne comes back and, you know, Doku's back in the squad and Haaland's available, the bench looks a bit stronger and everything starts to melt a little bit, that we feel like we've got... And by that point, in a few months' time, Kovacic and Nunes might be a little bit more adapted. It might feel a bit, you know, it might feel fine. It could feel fine. But it might not be. And I'm Harbinger raised a good point. He said, all Pep's teams need great number 8s. We have no great 8. Where's David Silva, Gundogan, De Bruyne, Xavi and Iniesta? Look, yeah, with De Bruyne in particular, that we're missing him. Gundogan, we can't argue that we're missing him. I would argue that Bernardo Silva can be a great 8. Phil Foden could be a great 8. You just need a little bit of time in that role to develop. But I would argue now, if you play Rodri, Bernardo Silva and De Bruyne in midfield, that's still better than probably every midfield in the league. Or Foden instead of Bernardo. I would argue that. Obviously, that requires a fully fit Kevin De Bruyne. Maybe Stones alongside... And Rico Lewis is very apt in that role. I agree, Christian. But I don't think really Rico Lewis is a great 8 yet. Rico Lewis is a talent. He's a young player with lots of potential, but he's not the level of Gundogan, De Bruyne, David Silva, you know, at that level yet. And that's not to call him. It's just he's 19 years old. And that is absolutely fine. He's barely played 10, 15 midfield starts in his career. And this is the level we're talking about here. When we talk about quality, we talk about experience at the same time. Rico Lewis is fantastic. But he can genuinely... I would be surprised if he's played the amount of games in midfield for City in his career as a digits on my hand. You know, I bet he's played 10. So this is where we're at. So what do we conclude from this game? I felt for a long time in that game we were really, really good. But then we continued to shoot ourselves in the foot as we've done so many times. We're now sat behind Arsenal. Only 5 points, which is not ridiculous. Liverpool, of course, drew embarrassingly yesterday United. Not as embarrassing as our Palace draw, maybe. But Liverpool drew United, so 4 points behind them, 4 points behind Villa. It's not a full-on disaster yet. Can we get back into it? Right now, I don't know. I'd be stupid to fully rule out this team. Anyone would be stupid to rule out this team. I don't know if we're quite there. I don't know if we didn't get quite the signings that we need. I don't know. And Calvin Phillips is going to leave as well, apparently. The breaking news this morning is that Juventus are getting close to signing him, which does leave the squad in a very interesting position because we're going to be one player down. Will we sign someone in January? Does De Bruyne coming back change things? Are we just waiting to tick into gear? Do we need a big result or two? How many more wake-up calls do we need? Does this squad have the potential to fix things? I think it potentially does, but I don't know that. I don't know why Jon Stones wasn't brought on earlier. I do think in general we talk an awful lot about players being out of form, but I think sometimes managers can be out of form too. I felt personally like the signs were there with 15 minutes to go that we weren't keeping the ball quite as well, which made me think, why don't we introduce... To me, I would have brought on Jon Stones. I would have brought on Kovacic. Maybe even a Kanji as well. those three players for me would have been the ideal introductions to that game, because I felt like, in particular, Stones would have the experience. Kovacic has got the experience too. He's good at keeping the ball ticking over. Kanji would have helped with a little bit of defensive solidity, and he might have helped. When you talk about individuals, you look. It's fair to say that right now Alvarez's form isn't that great. I know he was still creating the odd chance here and there, but he's not looking as sprightly as he is, and that may sort of cost us a tiny little bit right now. I think Kyle Walker's form. Kyle is definitely a 6 out of 10 at max right now. The worrying thing for me about Kyle Walker is that he's getting beaten quite easily by wingers. He used to be the guy who'd rarely get beaten, but the other, what's he called, like Franco or whatever, that young winger of theirs, skinned him within minutes, and it didn't look like he was going to catch him either. I'm sure he's still got an awful lot of pace, but right now, things do not feel like Kyle Walker. It doesn't feel like Kyle Walker's at his best. And if he's not offering much defensively, he doesn't offer much going forward. Though he did put one nice cross in the game, actually, to be fair to him. But he rarely offers that much going forward. It does make me think, are we sort of handicapped down that side? And Adam's right in the chat. We can't always rely on the second half of the season. It could catch us for the season. And this might be the season that it does. I think I've sort of made my peace with that. I think in general, we have to accept that we're not going to win the league every single year. Sometimes you have to accept that maybe things are sort of in transition. There's a reason that teams that reach the pinnacle sometimes drop off quite a lot after. It's just very hard to maintain. Players want to move on. Players want new challenges. And I think naturally you lose a tiny bit of that edge. I don't think players intentionally drop the levels. I think in general it's just hard not to... Look, I feel it a little bit as a fan of like, well, we did win the treble. And I don't mean to feel that way, but there is an element of... Football is so condensed together these days that the Champions League final only felt like yesterday to me too, and it's hard not to shake that. And I don't think consciously these players are thinking of that, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of, is the lust there? Maybe it is, the lust for success. Maybe it is, I don't know. Maybe it is actually. It could just be that this is the season that we don't win it, and this is the season that we need to sort of motivate the players to go again. I don't know, maybe we could win the Club World Cup, maybe we could go far in the Champions League, maybe that becomes a motivation. What I do know is that it'd be very simple for me to write off this season, but I think it'd also be very stupid of me to do that, because this City side, they are built of relatively stern stuff. We've seen them do it time and time again. When De Bruyne comes back, if he comes back anywhere near the level that he's got, that makes a difference. If we find a settled team, if Doku continues to develop, if Jack Grealish improves on his current form, which he's really good at right now, Phil continues to create chances through the middle. Look, I do feel at some point Pep will change things up if it's not quite working. And Pep was really weirdly kind of like pragmatic afterwards. I think he accepted that there was a sort of resignation of... that it's just not quite right, just not quite right. And he seemed a little bit frustrated by the fact that we don't feel kind of good enough right now. And I think he's probably right, unfortunately. I feel like it isn't ideal where we're at. It isn't ideal where we're at, and he doesn't know what more he can do. And other than maybe get the players confident, maybe winning the, maybe winning the Club World Cup, I don't know, maybe that could change things. I will do a Club World Cup preview, probably live later tonight or tomorrow, I don't know, because I'll obviously be doing the Champions League reaction in a minute. But we'll have to see where we're at. But I needed to get this off my chest. I would implore City fans to not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We've got a lot of quality there. We're still in reasonable touching distance. Are we good enough? I don't know. Time will tell. Time will tell on that front. I think, unfortunately, the problems are confidence related. I think they are. We'll have to see if that confidence can turn around, because right now we can't hold the nerve. Guys, anyway, I'm going to get ready to do the Champions League draw. I'll do a live reaction as the draw comes in, okay? For now, though, in a bit, and I'll see you probably in 5 minutes' time. Bye-bye, guys.